You know, a lot of enterprises, I think, are well past the point where we've proven ROI on limited scale deployments, demos, sandbox environments, things like that. It's not really the question anymore. For a lot of enterprises, the question now is how do you safely scale those experiments? How do you get them into production databases, touching customers, for example, things that if the agent breaks are catastrophic for your business? How do you trust the agents to take autonomous action in those environments? So that's what this panel is about. And just briefly on myself, my name is Dan. I'm a partner at Third Point Ventures. We are a roughly 30-year-old venture capital firm in Menlo Park. We lead rounds and invest in companies in the early and early growth phases, preferably at the intersection of cybersecurity and enterprise automation and dev tools and infrastructure. And so this question is one that we grapple with quite a lot as a firm. It's what led me to invest in Yaron's company on this panel, Diagrid. And so with that, I will pass it down, maybe start on my right, and I want everybody to briefly give your intro, say who you are, what you do, and in 1 or 2 sentences, what is the hardest production AI problem that you think enterprises are underestimating today? And then we'll get into the discussion. So please.
Hi, I'm Sheridan Gray. I'm a product manager at Meta. I focus on AI risk. I consolidate across privacy, legal, security, comms, policy, and partnerships. And then I guess, what was the question?
In 2 sentences, yes. What is the hardest production AI problem that is being underestimated right now?
I think that the hardest one right now is understanding what is the appropriate set of policies to apply to agents in particular. I think there's a lot of good policies on what users are allowed to do and a lot of good policies on what machines are allowed to do. But when you're having a machine act on behalf of a user, I think that starts to blend the two, and I think we really need to evaluate what the appropriate policies are.
Hello everyone, I'm Asit Sahu. I lead AI platforms for Iron Mountain, where I'm building a content management platform. And in that, I've been lucky to lead the enterprise AI search, workflows, and the content management side. Regarding the question, I believe enterprises are still underestimating the amount of effort it takes to create a good, reliable data infrastructure for agents. We had it for the software SaaS side of things, but agents are a different beast, which would need different controls, different security, different permissioning, and that has to be all embedded in a unified layer, which is even much more complex. I would say that that's the one.
Okay, thank you. My name is Yaron Schneider, CTO and co-founder of Diagrid. I also am the chair of the Workflows Working Group at the Agentic AI Foundation. Diagrid, we're focused on AI agent reliability. And before that, I also started 2 Cloud Native Computing Foundation's open source projects, which became graduate projects, Dapper and Kida, if you're familiar with them. And yeah, happy to be here. The underestimated problem, I think, is definitely failure recovery. Dan, I think if my entire life flashed before my eyes, I think I'd find that 90% of that would have been spent talking to companies about what they do when their agents fail. I think that is grossly underestimated. I think if we take the definition of sanity, right, where you have a certain input, you run it a couple of times, you get the same output, AI agents flip that on its head, right? It's like insanity by default because those things are non-deterministic. And when you're operating in those environments, knowing how to handle those types of failures is paramount.
So I'm Holly Hahn, and here's what I know. To get AI from experimentation to production is really an operating layer. That is data readiness, governance, cost discipline, how work moved around different functions. And the way why I know about it is because I spent the last 20 years working across different technology transformation. The first 10 as a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and then the last 10 working just that at a health tech and fintech company as an operation leader. The last 2 years been focusing on AI. And answering your question, it's really around all the reasoning and the assumptions that human take when they move, when the work is taking, the work is moving around in the different function. I think that is a very hard to replicate context for the models and for the agents to work properly.
Andre Elizondo. I run product at a company called Mesmo. We're building the agents and the agent operating environment for running basically all of production using agents. And so, yeah, spent the last decade plus in various different areas of operations and security. And as far as going into the question of what's the most challenging or underestimated problem right now, I think it's really planning for not just the first agent in production, but like 5, 10, 20, and actually taking a platform-based approach to a lot of the problems that we're solving with agents in production. And so I think we're going to very quickly, see some of the challenges with multi-agent systems, things like shared memory, things like governed autonomy. And so I think that the platform side of agents is still in its infancy stage, which is incredibly important.
Great. So now what we'll do is we'll get into this discussion. What I'll do to keep things sped along is I'll direct questions to specific people per question, but I would encourage everybody to jump in. If you hear something that you would like to respond to, please do. But for this first question, this is specifically for Yaron and for Holly. I want to know, everybody has seen impressive tech demos and sexy demos and things that work well in sandboxes. But what fundamentally, in your mind, the number one thing, what breaks in production that wouldn't break before production? And what does breaking look like?
Your expectations to begin with. When you're running a demo, you don't expect the thing to have 9 nines of reliability, right? Or 5 nines of reliability. When you're taking it into production, that's going to be the first thing you care about. AWS is going to go down, Azure is going to go down, network's going to go down, some developer introduced a bug, your pod's going to crash, Kubernetes is going to deciding not to have a really great day, your DevOps team's not going to have a fun time, things are just going to not work. And so we've spent the last 40 years, I think, really trying to solve reliability for regular deterministic applications. And we've done fairly well, but now with non-deterministic systems, the stakes are much, much higher. Because now everything you do is tied to an LLM call. And if you have a 100-step workflow and you fail at 99, if you have to start all the way from the very beginning, that's a very, very bad thing to do. If it's a demo, you might use, a fake LLM. You might use some cheaper model. You really don't care. But when you take it into production, the reliability expectations, the SLAs that you care about, the security primitives that you're putting, the data that you're connecting the agent to, that's all real-world production issues that we've seen for a very long time. And yes, agents only make that thing a whole lot harder to both make reliable and secure at scale.
Well, so for me, experimentation, demo, they're proving the product work. In production, you want to prove that the product actually can scale and not break the budget. And I guess everyone have keep up with the news that how, was it Salesforce already spent all their AI budget and so on. So I think one of the things that where it's really difficult to, sorry, just a fly right around my face the whole time, is to be able to tell, well, I agree with everything you're saying, so I'm not going to repeat, but then add on top of it from an operations perspective is how do you know that the product that worked in a demo, in experimentation, can actually scale for from a inference token and all that perspective, and even from a data perspective that yesterday's how you look at the data isn't exactly how you look at data in the production environment. And so I think all that, just to keep it short because you already listed out a lot of things, I think those are things I would be thinking a lot about.
If I could chime in, one fundamental thing which we see that in enterprises, if your ingestion data changes, obviously there will be agent failure modes. The question is, can your exception handling really know when to pass it to the human without confidently saying it is great? The moment there are certain false positives like that, the enterprise, like user, it doesn't want to use the platform at all. There's a big adoption problem there. So you should know when to pass on to the human and what is the threshold, and then cascade it down.
Cool. Can't argue with that. the next thing I wanted to ask, and this is addressed to Sheridan and to Andre. There is a certain risk profile that we are accustomed to with traditional software, and I think that risk profile maybe looks a little bit differently with agents, and I want to know what your take is on that. How do the risks differ fundamentally between traditional old-style software and agents running in production?
Yeah, so I generally think about risk from what data are the models allowed to be trained on, what are models allowed to output, what are agents allowed to do, and then the governance around all of them. And in the agentic world, I really think that the role of the agent plays the most, and then the role of governance is really changing quite a bit as well. I already spoke about on the agent side, like what are they allowed to access? What are they allowed to do? Enterprises might want to siphon off their AC priv documents, or you might not want certain small strategy groups having their documents exposed to the broader organization. Consumers might be, like end users might be putting in their health data, and they don't want the agents to have access to that, or their financial data, or their email accounts, or something like that. And so being able to cordon things off is super important. On the governance side, I think it's very novel too, because we've historically in traditional software worked where you write a product spec, you code to that product spec, you can test against that product spec, and agents now can totally bypass that by just writing the program on the fly, making curl calls directly to the internet. And so it's really moved away from PRDs towards heavy evals. And I think that like researchers have really picked up on the eval world, but the rest of the entire industry needs to, from regulators to product managers to designers. The entire industry needs to really learn how to upskill on evals. And I think that that's like something that's yet to be addressed. So,
yeah, just to add on the evals piece, I mean, I think like the interesting thing about agents is like you really have to protect the lowest common, or like the weakest link, which is always the model. And so things like red teaming your agents, understanding their threat model, understanding like what's the worst possible blast radius of what this agent can do, and then building kind of around that is like super important. The other thing I was just going to highlight is to the point that you made there is like there's now kind of like, in the past for traditional software, we cared about the supply chain of like, the application itself, the libraries, depending on, and that's pretty much it. Now we have to think about the supply chain of like, hey, if this agent needs to access a particular tool, like over MCP, okay, what is the actual integrity of that MCP server? What are the skills? Are those skills actually coming from trusted providers? Do they have the ability to introduce behavior that I don't want? And so there's kind of like this now composite supply chain security of like net new things that we didn't really have to think about. And again, that's all back to like, if I can compromise one of those pieces, I can always get back to the model, and that's where like the model has the ability to kind of compromise the entire chain. And so I think there's some interesting patterns with things like Camel and like being able to separate out some of the actual data gathering versus the procedural behavior. But it's early, and to the point that was made earlier, there is just kind of a challenge of dispersing this knowledge where companies are actually doing this consistently right now.
I want to double down on something that you said, Sheridan, and ask you, you mentioned a few things that need to exist before agents can run in production reliably. Expand on that a little bit, but I'm more so curious, who owns that? Like, whose responsibility is it to create the things that you mentioned, surveys, things like that?
yeah, so I mean, I think, well, we certainly have like our DevOps teams that are responsible for owning of the operations of them. But I would say that like the owning of the monitoring and oversight of the agents in production is largely done by security teams and by content teams. The ability to monitor what they are producing and the logging that they're creating, and the ability to pull them back is super important. And that's kind of where the DevOps time folks would get into. And then in terms of like who owns the policy, fortunately we already have existing policy teams that really focus on those. but they're just having to reframe a lot of the things that they focus on.
So I would add that I feel like the people, the stakeholder who actually receive the outcome of what the agents do should be a huge, should be responsible, in fact, on the eval, because they would be the one that who fully understood the outcome of what's being produced by the agents, right? It's not really, technology should make sure that it all work, and policy, all the context is there, but then at the end of the day, it's about the outcome and being able to evaluate that.
Yeah, plus one to that. I mean, that's why I mentioned like the entire industry needs to upskill on the eval side of things, from the product managers who are building the products as well.
And using the product, yeah.
Next, I want to talk about, so that's really good. On the organizational side, I think there's a lot of open questions. We can keep talking about that. On the infrastructure side, I'm curious, and this is for a seat and for your own. On the infrastructure side, what infrastructure needs to be built for agents, but more specifically, do you think that agents are going to adapt to existing software infrastructure? Will agents be written in such a way that they are able to take advantage of existing infrastructure? Or does infrastructure need to be redesigned from the ground up? And you could take infrastructure to mean whatever you want it to mean, security, durability, whatever it is, but the entire guardrail around the software package.
Yep. I think we already have examples where current software stacks do not work with agents, and I can give you a few examples. Let's take OpenTelemetry. That's been a long-standing CNCF standard for how we observe different applications. That's not really working well for agents. It's trying to, but there's other frameworks like Open Inference and others who are trying to, yeah, you can see the fly as well.
The fly's on my side.
All right, yes. But there's other standards. They're now starting to replace things that we've used for almost 10 years now, just because agents can't work well with them. Another example is authentication in the terms of security. We've had OAuth, right, and OIDC and identity providers inside of enterprises for a very, very long time. But this doesn't work well anymore because now you have on behalf of authentication. And now the chain might have an agent acting on behalf of an agent, acting on behalf of a human, acting on behalf of an agent, and the inception goes way, 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 way back, right? So there is a new standard now called AAuth. Trying to replace that. So I think that, yes, a lot of the things we want to be built with agents and be used by agents cannot actually do so. And so I think new infrastructure is coming up now, whether it's standards and protocols. This is something we're trying to do inside of the Agentic AI Foundation, really create new and novel protocols that are agent first and not necessarily cloud first.
Yeah, so I would like to look at two important components in this. One is when we're building old time, like softwares, you know what to build, you test, and you move on. In agentic world, you have to evolve. That means you have to inspect at every step. First, you're inspecting at the data ingestion layer. Is the data coming? Is it the right context? And can I give that visibility to the user that it is the right context? Second, the agent itself has access to tools and is reasoning. So can I give that visibility to the user, saying, this is what the tools are being called for this reason, and this is being consistently called in this way. So the reliability needs to be there. And the last piece is which Sharon mentioned about evals, and that's the inspect angle. Again, evals, like who decides evals? Is it the technical folks or is it the business folks? I can give you two examples. We were trying to build a financial spreading and another clinical coding. Now the problem is business people may not know how to create those evals. Now the technical folks sneaks in some particular way, and then there is continuous monitoring. Who monitors it? Is it the technical folks? Is it the business folks? So inspect, that layer needs to be created at all the three. Another piece which I am seeing much more is the agentic security. When you say agents, at what layer do you build security? Is it at the agent protocol level, agent to agent interaction? Is it at the tool level? Or is it at the database which is accessing? Second, how long do you want your agents or these tools to have access? Is it ephemeral, like task based, or is it continuous, having over permission? Today what you see in demo is take an agent, give the tools, put it in a box and run forever. It works great in demo. But in production, if say one of your tools gets malfunctioned, that's a gateway to the entire stack. Because now you're talking of tools to agents, agents to agents, and you can like literally pull out all the information out of a company like us, whose core pillar is trust. Now, if your data is out, like the company is out completely with one instance.
I think supply chain attacks don't differentiate which parts of the stack they're targeting, so I think you need to secure all three layers you mentioned, the agents, the MCP servers, all the way down to the actual database.
So this question is addressed for, to start with, for Andre and for Sheridan and for Yaron. And the question is, if you look out 5 years from now, what will the enterprise AI stack have that is missing today, in your view?
In 5 years, I think right now, I struggle with bringing along regulators, and I think that like in 5 years, I think that there will be a stronger appreciation and understanding of the way in which software is built and operates that they are still on the learning curve for. And then in terms of like more tactical things, I think that, I don't know, on some levels I just think we won't have jobs. Like, no, but truly, like, I do think that we will get to a point where there is perfect context for all the decision making that companies are using, and right now I think that's quite limited. So
I think also we'll have the benefit of building on both good examples and bad examples of where companies have successfully, changed all the way that they build software, they run software, they ship software to use agents, and somebody can kind of have the Netflix moment of AWS where it's like, I'm just going to do what Netflix does. And we don't have a lot of those examples just yet. And so because of that, a lot of people are experimenting for maybe the first or second time. I think the other thing that's going to be most likely what we see in the next 5 years is like right now, everybody is kind of looking at the choices that they have for the baseline components, right? When you think about like AWS, Azure, GCP with just like offering VMs, that was kind of like where most people started. And then, we're kind of seeing that with a lot of the agent ecosystem right now, is it's a lot of components that you need to stitch together. I think if we've learned anything from cloud and containers and things like that, it's like we're gonna start with these choices of basic components, and then that's gonna move up the stack where it's a lot easier for me to say like, I just want a system that's gonna manage, it's gonna do context engineering for my agents, and maybe that's gonna be tailored to the types of tasks that I'm working with, or like, memory is another example right now where like people are trying to figure out memory kind of all in a very generic way and trying to then work on tailoring it from there. And I think we're going to kind of get to the point where we have not only higher levels of abstractions that we can then build our agents on that are kind of like optimizing the components below, and then also, those components are something that then we have the power of choice across cloud providers, vendors, and whatnot. Whereas right now it's still a little bit novel for like individual components doing things that nobody else can do. So I think it'll just be kind of natural maturing of the ecosystem.
Here's what I'd like to see. I want agents to, or let's start with LLMs actually. I want LLMs to break beyond the transformer architecture, and for us to be able to provide much less hallucinating things that talk back to us. And then I want to compress the layers. I will basically want to see agents running inside of sandboxes, running inside of the LLMs themselves, to basically, just for the sake of security, just make everything one layer instead of separating those out, because that's a cause for performance issues, it's a cause for latency, it's a cause for costs, and it's a cause for many companies that come out with many solutions to the same problem. So I really want to see a lot of layers just coalescing around a single one that combines everything together. It's a very, very good security posture, and I think it allows us to run agents and LLMs in a much more accurate way.
Well, I only have one more question left, and this is going to be a lightning round for everybody going down the line. And I want your quick soundbite answer, which is, what do you think is the most underestimated requirement for running AI in production? You have to pick one.
I would say if you're going to do it in production, always have your redundancies and ability to pull things back. In sandboxes, you don't need that, but in production, you always need to have your backups.
So agents will become truly dynamic and will progress only if they have a good feedback loop. So a closed feedback loop needs to be there, which means every human interactions with the agents gets ingested back either at a frequency of now or weekly or monthly. But if we have to ever evolve and get to the AGI thing ever, feedback loop is the way forward for production.
Attestation. I don't think you can put an AI system into production without knowing exactly who did what in a cryptographically independently verifiable way. There is no way you can trust a system that way, especially not one that comprises of so many different actors, which are agents acting on behalf of agents, on behalf of humans, like we've surmised before. You have to know who did what in a way that is tamper evident. I think this is a must-have requirement for production.
I'm wrestling with two, but he only gave me one. So I think it's treating tasks equally. Like as an example, we're telling agent to send an email or an agent to do a refund. Right now, I think we're treating those equally, but really when you think about the decision and really the judgment that needs to be made is so different, and it's everything around it that will help the agent make those right decisions that I think is underestimated.
My big requirement comes back to, I think we're all seeing that tokens are getting more and more expensive. Context windows are still limitations in a lot of things. So I think context engineering is going to be a more and more important requirement that, like, as you get to production, you're always going to run out of your context window. You're always going to be, fighting token economics in some way or form. So in order for those to continually live in production and not get pulled back when they're eating through your AI budget, or, they can't manage their context window effectively, they're hallucinating, whatever. I think that's going to just become more of a table stakes requirement that is now taking a lot of different forms and isn't necessarily always a requirement, because right now we're kind of still in a little bit of the subsidized token space. And so I think we'll just see more and more of like tokens being kind of the primary thing that we're engineering around the economics of that a lot more, a lot more detailed than we are today.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. I enjoyed the discussion. I hope everybody else did too. I want the organizers to know we were perfectly on time. And please, everybody, give a round of applause to everyone here.